Have you heard inflation's coming down? Sure you have. But inflation's still with us. But would you believe that there are actually some things that are cheaper this year than they were last year? Let's dig into the number and see what we're talking about, specifically in goods, because goods are cheaper, according to the latest numbers, than they were a year ago. Specifically in goods, we have cars, they're cheaper, used cars specifically. Furniture is cheaper than it was a year ago. And in apparel, kids' footwear is cheaper than it was a year ago. Sorry, other footwear is more expensive than it was a year ago. And televisions are cheaper than they were a year ago. You're probably not surprised to hear that. Energy is also cheaper than it was a year ago, specifically gas. Gas is about 5% cheaper than it was a year ago. Going down the list further, we see that food is more expensive than it was a year ago, 2%. Specifically, most of that inflation comes from eating out. You're probably not surprised to hear that either. Finally, and last but not least, is services. Services is much more expensive than it was a year ago, specifically 5%. If we dig into that number, the biggest culprit there is rent or something equivalent to rent. That's about 5% more expensive than it was a year ago, and that is the last bit of sticky inflation that's worrying the Fed. That number should run around 3%, which is where it was just prior to the pandemic. So things are cheaper, but services certainly are not.